Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Suding. I'm a field engineer at Rundeck, and I'm going to be talking about PowerShell for common tasks to reduce toil. So here's the agenda. I'd like to talk about the use cases for PowerShell and Rundeck, how it works, because it helps you understand how it works and what it can and can't do. Then I'm going to go into the actual examples here. So managing users in Active Directory, for example, starting and stopping and restarting services. I wrote a new plugin called Disk Space that's capable optionally of clearing space on a Windows server. A new one I wrote yesterday, just a script that tells you that if the processor is overloaded on a Windows server, give me the top 5 processes, and then of course any remaining questions we have at the end. So let's start by talking about the different editions of Rundeck. We have a community edition, which I'm sure several of you have used. We also have the paid enterprise edition, and you might be asking yourself what's different about the enterprise edition. And so here's a good grid comparing. The reason I bring this up is one of the most important elements for this webinar is the PowerShell plugin. And this is a PowerShell executor. So this allows you to run steps that are using PowerShell script. In addition, there's several other plugins, and we'll probably take a look at those just so you can see them or just show you the list of them. And the one is a SQL runner, which allows you to talk directly to any SQL database, including Microsoft SQL, Oracle, Postgres, and MySQL. VMware, talking to a hypervisor. ServiceNow, talking to the ticketing system. If you do have Active Directory, but also have Okta or Ping Identity, and then GitHub for other integrations. So that describes Enterprise Edition and the things that come along with that. So let's talk about the architecture, a little bit of Rundeck that'll help explain how it works. Here in the center here we have, this is our help documentation, by the way, and I just typed architecture and this comes up. But here are the 2 Rundeck servers that live in your environment. They can be virtual machines, they can be Docker containers. One of them can be Linux, one of them can be Windows if you have a mixed environment, or both can be Windows or both can be Linux. You can also add additional instances to any cluster to scale up, so to speak, or offer separation. And as well as you can designate certain servers with policies to run certain jobs. Down here at the bottom, you have the requirement for a relational database. This is something you already have on site. And this is where the job definitions are stored, the access control list, which I'll show you, and the keys. Keys meaning passwords or public-private keys that are secrets, essentially, that can be used in any Rundeck job, as well as the activity. And the activity is that audit log showing who ran which job and when. The log store is basically a shared storage system of some sort. It could be S3, could be Azure Blob Storage. It could be just an NFS share on a NAS or something. Then there's the node definition. Now, terminology is important, especially with Rundeck. Nodes are the different servers that you're talking to, or perhaps APIs. So nodes is a very important term. We don't want to, build a list from scratch. We want to tie into something you've already got. So whether this is, in Active Directory or in, your ServiceNow CMDB, or even a SQL database or a flat file, either way, we can grab it with the resource model plugins. Of course, most of you probably use Active Directory, so you want to tie in and not have to remember different user IDs and passwords. So you tie into your existing Active Directory, and that's done with a simple Active Directory service account that does lookups and will bring along all the groups for you so that you get the right permissions from the Active Directory groups. In front of these Rundeck servers, if you will, or containers, is a load balancer. As with most redundant applications, you want to round robin or do load balancing literally, and so you need your own load balancer VIP in front of it, a virtual IP address. This represents the different ways you can talk to Rundeck. You can talk to it, of course, through the web browser, which I'll be showing today. The Rundeck CLI, I won't be showing that today, but that's pretty straightforward. And we also do have a very thorough, comprehensive REST API so that you can do anything that you can do in the UI, in the user interface, with our API, our REST API. Hopefully that architecture explains, kind of an overview before we, go into detail. Now, for my demo system that we've built, I decided to build it in Azure, and we have an Azure load balancer. I have a Windows Rundeck server, and I have a Linux Rundeck server. It happens to be Ubuntu. Again, these are all just, these 2 are Azure virtual machines. This is just an Azure resource, if you will. That's their most generic term. And then I'm tying into Azure SQL, but you can, tie into your existing SQL database. And these are my nodes, just some example. I do have Active Directory here on this server. I have a regular Windows 2019 server with Oracle and Postgres on it. And then I have actually two CentOS servers, one with MySQL and one, I think, just that I added very recently. This is just for access from the office. So this is at this URL, and this is what this is what I typically demo. So let's talk about if one of the things, if you want to get more of an overview, and before I dive in here, if you want to get more of an overview, I recommend this 5-minute demo where it goes into most of the features of Rundeck, and it's at rundeck.com/c-demo. And so you'll be able to play this. This is done by one of our founders, and this speaks to the use cases of shorter incidents and fewer escalations. Let's talk about some common use cases here. I'm going to start with users. So I'm going to go here to the agenda, manage users in Active Directory. So here I'm logged into that SpaceCat systems here, and I'm a admin. So if you want to see who you are, you just pull this down and say it's admin Mike. And now I'm going to just sort of click on this, make sure I'm still logged in. This is the project I want to go into. I've created a project. You can have as many projects as you want, and click this. And this is, there's 61 jobs in this project. This is just sort of miscellaneous testing. And you can create subfolders here, as I have, for different categories if you want to. These little green buttons are the play button, essentially the run button. Now I'm going to go down to a category I have called user stuff. And the first example I'm going to do is show you a job that has GUI elements. This is a web form. And so I'll show you how I provided these, but take my word for it, you don't have to do any HTML coding to get this. You have the chance to use pull downs. You have the chance to use checkboxes. You have fields that can be required here. That's what this little triangle means. And in addition, you can do field validation. So if I try to fill in a name here or an email address that is not a valid email address, doesn't have @ in the middle, etc., it won't let me run this job. Similar with the password, most of you probably have a password policy in Active Directory. And when I managed our department at Citrix, we had the 3 out of 4, the Microsoft complex password. So it must be upper, lower number, or any combination of 3 of these 4. So let's create a user, Donald Duck, and then Donald Duck, let's say, is in the IT department, and a phone extension. Of course, you can make all these optional. They're in the red and yellow group, let's say, and then you can have this automatically combine if you want to. I just left it at that. And then I'm going to type in a bogus password that doesn't meet that password spec, and then show you what it looks like here. And then I'm going to click Run Job Now just to see what happens. So it says option password value was not valid. So, and I put these little helper text down here. So I'm going to fix that. And so I've got 3 out of 4 of those, and let's run the job and see what happens. So you can see that it says 46% of average 16 seconds. So of the number of times, Rundeck keeps track of how long it takes on average to create this, and you can see it says done. But like a skeptical IT manager that I am, I wrote into the script, please display the information right after I created the user, and it shows that that is enabled. And then also I wait 5 seconds and then add them to the groups. And I'll show you what's behind this, but this tells me that they are in these groups right now. So because I'm an admin, I can edit this. I'm going to pull down this menu here. There's lots of ways to get into the edit screen, but this is one of them. And so this is broken down into, looks like 7 tabs here. The detail tab is just the name of it. Now I'm going to go to the workflow. These are the fields that I've created for my web form. And so this one's the department thing. Let's just take a look at this. It's got plain text here. It's a list composed of this comma delimited, value. Again, this is departments. You could pull this from your database, your HR system if you want. If you have these in Active Directory, you can pull. These plugins I created a few months ago tie into existing Active Directory users and group. So I'll show you where we can utilize those. And then you can restrict, you can require this field. So this is one of those fields that was required. So that's an example of those passwords. Now, each of these, options, each of these options can be used in future steps. And let me show you what I mean by that. So let's say we look at this groups here, and let's go down here. You can see that if we look at this, it tells you the syntax that you would use is at option.groups at. So that comes from the fact that above here, the option name is groups, which happens to be the same as the label, but the label is just what shows on the screen. So think of this as a display name for that field. So you'll see now, when I go down here, this is the meat of it. So this is using PowerShell here, and I'm essentially using variables from the options above here in my script. So option.firstname, option.lastname, etc., option.username. Those are getting fed into this script. In typical PowerShell fashion, just for readability, I have I think you call this the tick mark to indicate, so I can make it, instead of one super long line, it's just multiple lines, but that's just a visual thing. And then I use the common write host to, just give information back. That isn't required, I just like to do that. There's my sleep of 5 seconds. And then this is getting the user so I can verify that it looks good. Now, I could have added the user into the groups in this script, but I purposely, to show you the modularity, wanted to show what it looks like as a second step here. So if I click on this step, I can see the input is from above, and then I'm splitting it, and then there's the main command, which is, here's the main command, which adds it to the specified groups. And then this is showing me who it's a part of, allowing me to double check it. This field down here is important because this specifies what type of scripting language we're using. So PowerShell, and if it's PowerShell, then the extension is going to be PS1, at least by default. You could override that, but very few people do, in my experience. And this step label is just what shows up when you run the job, if you want a sort of helpful visual tip here. So this is what a job looks like overall. Let me show you some of the other tabs here. Because this is, an Active Directory, communicating with a domain controller, an Active Directory, this is just executing on the Rundeck server. Dispatch to nodes, I'll show you that later. That's where you essentially copy the script to the target nodes. I'll show you this when I talk about drive space and clearing out drive space. That's a good example where you would dispatch it to nodes. And then schedule, these aren't scheduled, but you could schedule a job to run at a certain time, or you can do the third Thursday at 3 p.m. Kind of complex schedule. I'm going to change that back to no. Notifications are useful. That's if you succeed or fail, or it takes too long, or just when you start a job, you want to send a notification, let's say to ServiceNow or to your Slack channel or some other chat. I've built this plugin here called Microsoft Teams notification, so you can just send a message to Microsoft Teams. Because if you're a Windows shop, you may have a free edition of that. All right, so now let's look at the other tab. The other tab here, the important choice I made was the log output. I wouldn't say important. I always do this when I'm developing jobs. I show this log output. That allows me to sort of debug it easier. So that's what it looks like behind the scenes. I took longer on this one because I wanted you to see all the details. Now let's take a look at some of the other jobs here. When I leave a screen like this, I get a warning, do I want to save it? So let's take a look at some of these others. So let's go down to the test section here, and then I'm going to I'm going to create some files, so that I have something to delete here. So this, bear with me while I create some files. This in itself is a job, and it uses the fsutil to add a bunch of files to a couple of servers here, and you can see it's still running. This is kind of does a before and after look. It's running here now. I can go back, and it'll keep running in the background, of course. And if I go to job screen, I can scroll down here and go to my next job, which is test driving the drive space plugin. Then I'll show you what's behind the scenes here. So if I click on this, Okay, and then I click Run Job Now. Okay, you can see that it's running through this drive step plugin. I'll show you the details. So this is showing how full the drive is. It purposely is only 13% full, but I've added some files and set my threshold really low here. This takes several seconds to run, as you can imagine. And then I'll show you what's behind this job. This is JSON output here that can be used in future calculations. But there's 3 files that match and will be deleted according to the spec. So let's take a look at this behind the scenes so we can see what the plugin and settable options are. So if I click Edit Job here, this shows the workflow, and there's only one step in this job, but it runs on multiple servers. So this scans the C drive and the D drive. If it's more than 12%, this is set to scan only. You can set it to scan and delete or just scan only. This is my rule that I want to delete any temp files in the Windows temp directory, and the -R is recursive. If you want to get fancy and do, if it's greater than 22 seconds old or less than 30 bytes in size, etc., you can do that. It's very flexible. And you can exclude some files and show file names. This would be if you want to actually see the file names in the log of what was deleted. So that's what it looks like. This is a plugin that I created, and we have instructions on how to create that, as well as a starting template. And all that plugin, not all, but the main thing plugins do is make it a little bit easier for if you're doing something a lot and you want to just have a few obvious options here. It's a great way to improve your Rundeck jobs by adding ease of use to it. Now I'm going to show you another job that restarts services. Okay, so here's a service job, and if I click on this, and I made an option here just to pick a certain service to restart. You could certainly pass this along. Let's say you had a monitoring system that said, the Acme service is no longer running, and then this could automatically start the Acme service. I just made this interactive so I could demo it. And then in typical Mike fashion, I like to show what the status is before and after to make sure it worked. That just gives me that extra peace of mind. So below is the status after restarting. So this is one server, and this is my second target server. So you might wonder, what's next? This looks good. How do I go further? The way we typically work is I would talk with you, as well as a sales rep would talk with you about your situation. We would definitely go through some of your biggest pain points, if you will, so that we can map it out. We can easily justify the cost of Rundeck and prove to you that it works. In the meantime, if you want to start out with the community edition, that's fine. Just know that the community edition has some limitations, and the enterprise edition has additional features. So you're welcome to talk with us about, but this is a good comparison chart for what's different and better about Enterprise Edition.